Les Misérables, Victor Hugo was one of the most influential poets, novelists, and playwrights of 19th century France. Beyond literature, he played a significant role in political and social reform. Born in 1802, Hugo was a pioneer of the Romantic movement and used his works to address themes of social inequality and human dignity. His most famous works include Notre Dame de Paris and Les Misérables. Les Misérables, in particular, is regarded as one of the greatest novels in world literature. It explores post-French Revolution social injustice, justice, forgiveness, and love. In addition to his literary achievements, Hugo was politically active, opposing monarchy and dictatorship. His opposition led to exile, but after the establishment of the French Third Republic, he was honored as a national hero. Upon his death in 1885, he was given a state funeral, and his remains were interred in the Pantheon. Believing that the pen is mightier than the sword, Hugo sought to change society through literature. His works continue to inspire and move readers today. On a cold evening, a weary man wandered through a village. Everywhere he went, doors were shut against him. He was Jean Valjean, a former convict who had spent 19 years in prison for stealing a loaf of bread. Starving for 4 days, he stopped in front of a house, the home of Bishop Myriel. The bishop welcomed him warmly, offering food and a bed for the night. Yet Valjean, hardened by years in prison, saw the world as cruel and unforgiving. In the dead of night, he stole the bishop's silverware and fled. The next morning, the police caught him and brought him back to the bishop. To Valjean's astonishment, the bishop did not accuse him, but instead said, "No, I gave those to him. And Jean Valjean, you forgot these take my silver candlesticks as well. Use them to become an honest man." For the first time, someone had shown him mercy. Shaken, Valjean clutched the silver candlesticks and resolved to start a new life. Years later, Jean Valjean, now under the alias Monsieur Madeleine, had become mayor of Montreuil-sur-Meran, a respected businessman. Yet he lived in constant fear. One man was determined to uncover his past, the relentless Inspector Javert. One day, Valjean encountered Fantine, a woman whose life had fallen into despair. Once a beautiful young woman, she had been abandoned by a man who left her with a daughter, Cosette. Desperate to provide for Cosette, Fantine had left her in the care of the Thénardier, an innkeeper couple who abused and exploited her. To send them money, Fantine had sold her hair, her teeth, and finally her dignity. Now sick and dying, she lay on the streets, shunned by society. Valjean vowed to protect her and promised to rescue Cosette. But Javert had discovered Valjean's identity and came to arrest him. As Fantine took her last breath, Valjean whispered to her, "I will find your daughter. I promise." Then he escaped and set out to find Cosette. Under the cover of night, Valjean arrived at the Thénardiers' inn. There, he saw Cosette, a frail 8-year-old girl, struggling to carry a heavy bucket of water in the cold. She barely understood that someone had come to take her away. But Valjean spoke gently. "You are free now, Cosette. Let's leave together." Taking her hand, he led her away from the cruelty she had known. They fled to Paris, where Valjean became a devoted father to her. However, Javert continued his pursuit. At one point, Valjean and Cosette had to escape over a monastery wall, where they finally found safety. The flames of revolution. Years passed, and Cosette blossomed into a beautiful young woman. One day she met Marius, a passionate revolutionary. The two fell deeply in love, but their happiness was overshadowed by the turmoil of the time. In 1832, revolution erupted in the streets of Paris. Marius and his fellow insurgents, including Enjolras and Courfeyrac, built barricades, ready to fight for the people. But the government's forces were too strong. The revolution failed. Marius was gravely wounded, collapsing amidst the fallen bodies of his comrades. Jean Valjean, despite his fears, carried Marius through the sewers of Paris to safety. On the way, he encountered Javert once again, but instead of killing him, Valjean let him go. "Javert, A man who had spent his entire life believing in rigid justice, was shaken to his core. How could a criminal show mercy? Unable to reconcile this truth, Javert took his own life. Marius survived, and he and Cosette were soon married. Believing his presence was no longer needed in Cosette's life, Valjean quietly withdrew from her world. Later, Marius learned the truth about Valjean's past, his suffering, his sacrifices, and his love for Cosette. Realizing how much he owed this man, Marius rushed to find him. But it was too late. Valjean, old and frail, lay in his final moments. As Cosette held his hand, he whispered, "Cosette, you were my light. Without you, I would have had no reason to live." With Cosette and Marius by his side, Jean Valjean took his last breath. On his grave, these words were inscribed: "He loved those who were unloved. He forgave those who were unforgiven." Jean Valjean had been a man of suffering, yet he lived a life more noble than any king. As the city of Paris dimly glowed under the lingering embers of revolution, the spirits of those who had fought for justice and freedom still lived on.